In this lesson, you'll learn how to conduct an ISO gap assessment. Some things we'll cover include a background on gap analysis, how you can make relevant decisions, and how to conduct a gap analysis. So we'll first start with an overview of ISO gap assessments. A gap analysis or assessment is used to assess an organization's readiness and its resources for building a management system. For example, an ISO 9001 QMS, ISO 14001, ISO 45001, or all as an integrated system. It also provides you with the data to develop a project action plan for ISO implementation. A gap analysis is a survey, often shown as a checklist, that determines the differences or gaps between the current business practices and the requirements of the assessed standard or standards. A gap exists where existing policies, processes, or procedures do not fully meet the stated requirements of the relevant clause of the ISO standard for certification. Gap assessments should always be done at the start of an ISO project. This is the first step in the process and should be performed as soon as the decision has been made to become ISO certified. Before you do a gap assessment, make sure to research the desired ISO standards for certification. Decide which standards would suit the needs of the business best. Ensure that the decision to become certified has been agreed with the top management. Create a plan to develop or integrate the organization's management system. There are many ISO standards that would benefit a business. The most common include ISO 9001, Quality Management System, ISO 14001, Environmental Management System, ISO 27001, Information Security Management, and ISO 45001, Occupational Health and Safety Management. The importance of a gap analysis can't go unnoticed. It highlights the areas that need work or what business needs to complete in order to qualify for ISO certification. Completing a gap analysis first will give you insight into what the business already does to meet the ISO requirements and what it needs to work on. A gap analysis can help with the following. Note, each point will be explained in further detail shortly. Saves time, saves money, focuses your energy, and narrows your goals. So on the time aspect, instead of blindly tackling endless, confusing paperwork without knowing whether the business qualifies for the chosen certification or not, a gap analysis will determine whether to begin in the paperwork process. Save time by learning where your company doesn't meet the criteria of the standard so you can improve those areas before starting the paperwork. Next, saving money. There's no point dealing with the certification paperwork before properly preparing to actually achieve ISO certification. It'll only waste time, be confusing, and frustrating. This loses time better spent in the more productive, valuable areas of preparing for certification. After all, time is money, and you're probably too busy already. On focusing your energy, all ISO standards have an intensive list of requirements that companies need to meet in order to become certified. Because it's a very involved list, it's easy to quickly become lost and focus on less relevant requirements. And finally, narrowing your goals. With a gap analysis, a business is less likely to spend resources on trying to fix areas that don't need fixing, while ignoring areas that the company needs to improve to meet the standard for certification. If a company's goals for improvement are too broad, a gap analysis will help to narrow them down. So what's the best way to conduct the gap analysis? We'd recommend using a checklist. Each question will align with a clause in the standard. It'll give you the details of the gaps and proposed remedial actions required to close identified gaps between the ISO standard and the current management system. The checklist you should use needs to be simple so that you can clearly indicate the gaps and also the level of compliance with different requirements. This then gives you the basis to create an action plan. Using the output of the gap analysis, develop a findings list and action plan. This can include additional tasks such as selecting and dealing with other outsourced parties that can help you with the certification process. The outcome of a gap analysis is that you'll have a list of activities and processes that comply and ones that don't comply. Those that don't comply become the target of your action plan. Use this knowledge to establish an accurate budget, timeline, and realistic expectations that are in proportion to the state of the current management system when directly compared to the requirements of the standards. Who will conduct the gap analysis? Ideally, this person should have skills in project management and auditing. Whoever undertakes gap analysis exercises must be objective, open-minded, be able to listen, communicate clearly, and report fairly without bias. They must also be familiar with the standard in order to perform an effective analysis. A gap analysis is a time-consuming, in-depth process. Ideally, the person running the gap analysis will have experience in quality assurance and auditing. Small businesses often don't have someone on staff who can complete the gap analysis, so hiring an ISO consultant could be a great support. While it will cost slightly more, they'll have a lot of experience. They can greatly decrease the time spent on a gap analysis, and you'll likely get a good result. So once you complete the preliminary steps, it's time to set a date. You'll also need to decide whether to audit the business by process and procedures or by each area of the business. It can make more sense to audit each area, as each one will be investigated in accordance with the relevant clauses of the ISO standard applicable to the area. Let the staff know about the gap analysis and why it's being conducted so they can be ready for the auditor. Before commencing the assessment, it would be beneficial to provide all the participants with the proposed agenda. While the process to becoming ISO certified is complex, actually completing a gap analysis is a lot less complicated. The organization may already have a compliant management system in place, or may be using an uncertified system. Conducting a gap analysis using a checklist provides a structured framework to help assess the current status of the management system in terms of fulfilling ISO requirements. Start the gap analysis by assuming that the company is already doing most of what ISO requires. This way, the gap analysis will tell you exactly where the business is in terms of meeting ISO requirements. There may be some concerns about the high cost of implementing an ISO management system, but this is inaccurate when you consider the benefits over the long term. This has to be seen as a business investment. The following detailed approach is applicable to most of the ISO standards. Initial review tasks. If you do it right and understand the standard, implementation should not be a problem when you already have a system in place. Here are some initial review tasks to consider. Compare actual performance of the management system with external standards, regulations, codes of practice, and guidelines. Review the organization's existing management procedures. Compare actual operations with internal policies and procedures. Identify policies and procedures dealing with external contracts for services and suppliers. Gather the views of internal and externally interested parties. Assess if and/or how other internal systems can help or interfere with management system performance. After you've done the initial review tasks, you should prepare the participating employees. The assessor will ask the employees questions about the management system using the gap analysis checklist, so make sure that the employees are prepared to answer questions. The gap analysis focuses on the present, so only look at the processes that are currently in place, not what is planned to be added in the future, or what's been done in the past. It's not about compliance or nonconformity to the current system, but on the design of the current system and how it matches the specific ISO standard requirements. For each requirement of the standard, identify the status of the current system. You can then turn that into a list of findings, and don't forget to take notes. They'll always come in handy later. After completing the gap analysis, review the results. Look at what needs improving and what already fulfills the requirements. This is where taking notes during the gap analysis process will help. Continue to keep notes detailing why a process needs to change, not just that it needs updating to fit the requirements. These notes will support the assessor or implementer to create a list of steps to improve the management processes. At the end of the assessment, a detailed report will have to be generated. This should include a summary of what was reviewed, the findings, and plans for follow-up actions. Some findings might be problems, and others may be opportunities for improvement. The report will usually summarize the gap analysis findings, which will usually identify categories of tasks, such as processes that comply with the standard and are documented, comply with the standard but need documenting, do not comply with the standard and need redesigning, and are required by the standard but not currently in place. Next, formally document the findings and conclusions as part of the summary report. It's important that the audit report doesn't just document the facts and data that managers already know. The true value is in identifying issues and opportunities not already known. Review the summary report with the process owners and management team, make final revisions, and create an action plan. Maintain objective evidence of the documentation audited. It can comprise physical or digital attachments with file reference notations on the checklist when you complete the gap assessment. When using the checklist, list the revision level of the procedure, date of record or report, and individual interviewed. When an auditor provides an opportunity for improvement, review whether the process owner accepts the suggestion and the plan for dealing with the suggestion. Often the first time that a gap or problem is put into words, it's vague, subjective, or even abstract. Without a proper definition, it's unlikely you can identify the root cause, which can lead to incorrect or insufficient corrective actions being put in place. Define nonconformity to ensure subsequent process steps proceed accurately and efficiently. The statement of nonconformity is the action or process that was observed to not comply with ISO requirements. The nonconformance should be written so it's easy to identify the process that's not adequate. Add the clause number of the standard, procedure number, or work instruction reference, information from interviews, etc., to make it easy to identify. Nonconformities should include information on the requirement, what the gap is that led to the nonconformance, what supporting evidence is available. This is what the assessor observed during the audit that caused the nonconformance to be identified and written. Additionally, if the organization is committed to a requirement in their own documentation, for example, the company quality plan, then evidence needs to exist that the organization conforms to the plan. Here's an example of identifying nonconformities using the checklist. A good summary report is the output that is the true value of any audit. During the gap assessment, the issues and improvements observed should have been noted. These should be clearly marked on the checklist so they can be quickly reviewed and captured in the gap analysis report. These results are then transferred to the findings list for action. The more information added to the findings list, the more thorough and effective the overall action plan will be in the later stages of preparing for certification. Although positive comments are not specified on the gap analysis checklist itself, it's always good policy to include positive comments in the gap analysis report summary. It can be good to know what the company already does well. So there you have it. You've unlocked a simple guide on what a gap analysis is and the benefits of how to conduct one yourself. Be sure to follow up this lesson with the provided quiz to ensure you understand the basics on gap analysis. We hope you're looking forward to the next lesson in the series. We'll see you there soon.